Why is it when there's a division, do woke crybabies always get their way? In the church? In politics against the Republican Party? That's why everything slowly drifts left. Welcome to the Doug TenNapel channel. I'm Doug TenNapel. This is where the happy patriots are. I hope you'll engage me and help me with this discussion. Don't go all crazy. I might even read a little scripture before we're done. But welcome. We're going to go into This Is My, I hope you'll indulge me, my own Twitter feed where I made a smart. Okay, here's breaking. Senator Rand Paul proposes a bill requiring the president to get congressional approval for new tariffs. Now, this is based on the idea, the premise by Rand Paul, who says that a tariff is a tax, therefore, you cannot have the president making taxation without representation, and the Congress is the representation. So he's trying to defend his place there. But I think he's a total screw up and really way off on this one. And I make a weird argument here because I was always super angry over Obamacare, which I believe was a tax, even though Chief Justice Roberts went to the Supreme Court and he said it was not a tax. But Obamacare was taxation without representation, and nobody cared. I mean, it passed, but I'm only saying now that the left has gotten all kinds of taxation without representation, they just recall it the Affordable Care Act. And then the right, when someone like Trump on the right comes up with a weird taxation form, which would be a tariff, then they go, we have to be rigid on this law, get them. But I'm saying that law, taxation without representation, it only applies to one side when the Republicans want to do it, because you'll never get bipartisan support for it unless the left wants to do it. So that's essentially what I'm saying here on Twitter. This is what the suicide of the right looks like. Only the left is allowed to perform, quote, taxation without representation, like when the Obamacare mandate went before the Supreme Court and John Roberts said it was not a tax. Now, they did not, that was a right-wing try to say, look, Obamacare, it's a tax. It's a tax. And the left did not want to say that they were raising taxes with Obamacare. So they called it the Affordable Care Act. And suckers, even like Rand Paul, I mean, they all said not to go for it. But suckers like John Roberts ended up saying, no, it's not an official tax. And so they got to pass it as an Affordable Care Act and some kind of Medicare, even though it's forced, you're forced by the government to pay them. So my premise is, like, we've gone so far to the left, like we have full-blown Obamacare now, full on. It's still anti-constitutional, and Rand Paul is spending his time making sure Trump does not get his tariffs through. And that's my beef with the right. Bad tactics. Okay, Trump should have called the tariffs the Affordable Care Act Part 2 and be done with it. And then everyone would be for it. The creep of woke policies absolutely uses the staunchest conservatives like Rand Paul to complete its mission. It's similar to how the church will formally shame the right wing in the church, but the left is treated with kid gloves, like a mentally deranged younger brother. We must extend compassion to the weaker brother. Now, I'm going to get into that argument with the scriptures because it references the scriptures. But the right wing is never allowed to be the weaker brother to bond with and maintain unity so that we don't sear his conscience by losing him. Now, what do I mean by that? It's why everything drifts to the left. I hope you'll walk with me for just a second through this argument as we read us some 1 Corinthians 8. If you're anti-Bible, just sit still. Just hold on 1 second. This is a principle, okay, that is either true or false. And here's the verses, chapter 8. Now, about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. That's the premise of the whole thing. That knowledge, which Paul knows that you're allowed to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Paul knows it. He knows it's okay. And then there was a group of young, zealous Christians that said, you cannot eat meat sacrificed to idols. And then, but the premise is, Paul says, the knowledge that he has puffs up while love builds up and kind of compromises for the greater goal of unity. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. but whoever loves God is known by God. Okay, so that's the kind of the conclusion of the whole chapter also. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols. And just to give you some backdrop on this, we know that in the book of Daniel, Daniel was not allowed to eat the meat because it was sacrificed to idols. So there's simply a bunch of young Christians now in Paul's time going, hey, the Romans are sacrificing meat to idols, so we don't eat this meat. And Paul goes, hey man, I can eat anything I want. I'm freed by Jesus. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world. That is, the evil, the principalities and all that don't have power over us. And that there is no God but one. So the other gods for which these idols were sacrificed to, it really didn't do anything because there's only one God anyways. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols, like these young Christians, that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, that's where we get the idea from a weaker brother, their conscience is weak, it is defiled. In other words, it's not wrong to eat the meat sacrificed to idols, but if you think it's wrong and you eat it, then out of your weakness, you are defiling yourself. It actually becomes something bad. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. So there's Paul. Eat meat sacrificed to idols or don't eat it. You are in fact not closer or farther from God in doing so. I would also say, be for tariffs or against tariffs. You will be no closer to God about this thing, okay? Because it's not an absolute that you not eat this meat sacrificed to idol. And that's the premise is, don't make an absolute out of what is not an absolute. It's like when, is it Peter where the big blanket unfolded and he was allowed to eat all the animals? And it says, do not call what is clean unclean. Because he kept going like, I can't eat these animals. I'm a Jew. I can't eat a frog and I can't eat a cloven hoof and I can't eat a platypus because I'm a Jew. I have to be kosher and clean. And then God says, hey, Peter, kill and eat, or is it Philip? I think it might, I can't remember who it is. But anyways, it was a Jewy guy who wanted to be all Jewish. And God goes, kill and eat. He goes, don't call unclean what I call clean. So it would be a sin for Paul here to call this stuff which is clean because it's been sacrificed to idols, for Paul to call it unclean. Paul refuses to eat it for other reasons. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. And that's the key. Paul has rights. We all have rights. Make sure it's not a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating at an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. See, it's not about being right. It's about not wounding ignorant people. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again so that it will not cause them to fall. That's the principle we got going, my people. That's what I'm running with. I'm going to go back to another conversation I had with a buddy of mine at church who, during COVID, right, he used this verse saying, look, I'm okay with not wearing masks in church and disobeying the government on COVID, but there are weaker brothers in this church that we must unify with, and we will do social distancing or shut down the church or wear masks for them, because we don't want to cause them to sin when they think taking their mask off will make someone sick and kill them. Okay, you don't want them to commit murder. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things wrong with that argument. Number one, a lot of people who wore that mask, they might not have really thought they would have killed someone if they took the mask off, because we saw them being okay with people marching in Black Lives Matter without a mask and doing social distancing. So they did not think that they were endorsing and helping black protesters kill other black protesters with a super disease, right? So you can take away one of those. That's one argument I would take away from them. The other one is, how come my side is never considered the weaker brother in the argument? Why not make them concede to us and say, I, the weaker brother, don't believe that masks work. Therefore, they should take off their mask and sit with me maskless, and don't make me sear my conscience and think it's sin to concede to the government and obey the government, to shut down the church even when it's against the Bible, to forsake the meeting of the brothers, let's say. Well, what ends up happening is right-leaning people are not lunatics like the left. We're not crazy like the left. So we always end up being negotiable. We negotiate with them. And so everyone ends up doing something to go along with the lefty crazies. That's all I'm saying, is I think in this case, it is the anti-constitutionalist Democrats who today are attacking Trump on tariffs, along with Rand Paul are attacking Trump on tariffs. And they always get their win. The left always get their win, because they will always take a conservative principle, like no taxation without representation. And they can get a sucker like Rand Paul to go along with it, because it sounds good in truth. But in the end, when it's Rand Paul's turn to need some unity with Democrats to throw some votes over our way to defend the Constitution, they won't be there. They won't do it. They will never consider the Republicans, the weaker brother, and someone to go along with for unity, or they'll never consider the Constitution true and something to follow no matter what. They'll always say, throw it out when it's our side, and raise it up, no taxation without representation, when it's your side. So the conservative principles always only work on the right. That is, guys like Rand Paul, it will only work with people on his right, and it will never work with people on his left. And that's why everything always goes leftwards. They always win. And that's where Trump, who I don't think is a strict constitutionalist at all, I don't even think he's a liberal constitutionalist, I don't think he's a constitutionalist at all, is just going like, you know what? We've been getting ripped off long enough. We're raising a tariff. And that's the principle. We've been ripped off by these weaklings who first say you can't eat meat sacrificed to idols. And then they start saying the government is mandating that we all get a vaccine and a passport, or you can't go outside and freely travel. And suddenly that becomes being kind to your sensitive brother, shutting down the entire church for the government. Do you see how this works? That's why everything's going leftward. Everything sucks. The Constitution is a joke if it only applies to one side. And that's what Rand Paul is doing. That's why I'm mad at guys like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. Your Constitution has not been followed by both sides for a long time. And if you're going to let it pass on Obamacare, then let it pass on Trump's tariff. Just call it the Affordable Care Act too. I'm Doug in exile. Am I right? Is this too, it's complicated, but I think I'm onto something.